everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We're happy to be coming to you courtesy of our broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. Joining us today on the show is the psychic lawyer, Mark Anthony. Mark is an Oxford-educated attorney licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the U.S. Supreme Court. He is a psychic medium and a nationally recognized legal and paranormal expert who appears regularly on major media outlets. His award-winning and critically acclaimed best-selling book entitled Never Letting Go is the definitive guide to healing grief with help from the other side. His website is neverlettinggo.com. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections.
Thank you, Brent. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. And I'm curious personally, how did you first get introduced to the Edgar Cayce material and the A.R.E?
My mother was a psychic medium, and as was my father. This runs in my family for generations, and Edgar Cayce was kind of one of our rock stars.
Okay. That's
I
awesome.
mean, I knew about Edgar Cayce when I was a little kid, and my mother always spoke of him with the greatest of reverence. In fact, I remember when I was a child, she and my dad they took a vacation by themselves. Well, they went to Virginia Beach to Edgar Cayce so she could do research and find out a bunch of things about Edgar Cayce. So I've always looked at him as a fantastic teacher. Certainly, he was one of the most unique mediums in history, and I think in the who's who of psychic personalities, he's definitely up there in the top 10.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And what was it like growing up in a psychic family? You said your parents were psychic?
Yes, it was like The Sixth Sense meets Everybody Loves Raymond, because if it wasn't weird. A lot of my colleagues who are mediums, they talk about how difficult and painful their childhoods were, and I'm not saying that mine was stellar, because when you're a psychic kid and you're different, you do tend to get picked on and all that. But I thought it was fascinating because when I had the invisible friends and I would see them, my folks were very, very cool about it. They didn't chastise me. They didn't, uh, you know, think I was crazy. They just told me, don't talk about it outside of the house, Mark, because not everybody's going to understand.
Right. And what was it like coping with your own psychic abilities? Did you always know that you had these abilities?
It was just part of who I was, and I didn't think it was all that weird. When I was around 4, I started getting the invisible friends coming to visit me, and I always felt the presence of spirits. But I also had a mother, and to a lesser extent, my father, because he didn't like talking about it. But my mom was very open about it. And so I didn't think it was odd or unusual. And to me, it was just part of life. As I got older, what I began to see, Brent, was that not everybody's family was like mine. In fact, there were very few families that I ever encountered that were like mine. And I understood then why they didn't want me to talk about it, because people don't get it. They think you're crazy. Look what Edgar Cayce had to go through. At least in this day and age, we have shows like this where we can talk about it. I've been on television all over the country and on radio all over the country and the world where it's discussed openly. You're always going to have the religious fanatics that say, oh, it's the work of the devil, blah blah blah, and you're always going to have the pseudo skeptics who are closed minded to anything that they can't see. But the fact of the matter is, this is now an openly discussed thing. And even so, we're subjected to a lot of criticisms. When I read the agony that Edgar Cayce went through, even though he was and is the most highly respected psychic in probably in the last 500 years, it's just pathetic. Someone with his talents these days would be looked at much differently, but he would still be subjected to the religious fanatics and to the pseudo skeptics.
Right. Absolutely. And have you experienced personally a changing of the attitude towards you being a psychic and also you balancing that with your professional life?
Oh, I have definitely seen changing. I was working for a government agency. I had a brief tenure there, and my boss was an elected official. Well, his political enemies found out about me and they plastered it all over the news and it was on TV and they were trying to destroy us. Actually, it had the opposite effect. It was kind of a boost in everyone's popularity, and my book sales for Never Letting Go jumped very high uh, that week. But uh, some of the attorneys that I've worked with are very respectful. Others have snide comments. But the fact of the matter is, Brent, I don't worry about what other people think. I focus on what I'm doing. And I look at law and mediumship not as diametrically opposed, but as both dealing with evidence, because as a lawyer I have to produce evidence to substantiate my case. As a medium I have to produce evidence so that I can verify the validity of the contact. But even more importantly, both in my capacity as a lawyer and as a psychic medium, it's all about helping people, and that's the key. It's a service gift, and Edgar Cayce definitely taught this. A service gift, no matter what it is, whether you're a psychic or an auto mechanic or a doctor or just a good parent, anything you can do in the service of another person is a gift from God and must be respected as such.
Absolutely. Great advice. And how exactly do you incorporate your psychic abilities when it comes to your practice of law? Is it come into play at all, or is it something that you just keep completely separate?
Oh, all the time. This is part of my skill set. I know some attorneys, their skill set is they're really good at ripping people apart on the witness stand, or they're so heartless they'll just beat you down for whatever amount of money. And that's not to say that I can't take somebody apart on the witness stand, but I use my gift to give me insights into things. It's always funny when people say, "Well, you're a psychic. You should know this. You're a psychic. You should know that." Psychic ability is not synonymous with omnipresence. In other words, I'm not all knowing and all seeing. God is all knowing and all seeing. It gives me insights into situations. And if you'll bear with me for a minute, in my book, Never Letting Go, I discuss about when I was selecting a jury, and it was prior to a criminal trial. First, the prosecution gets to ask questions of the prospective jurors, and then the defense does. And the reason for jury selection is so that each side can get the most fair and impartial jury as possible. Well, I kept getting drawn to this one woman, and I kept feeling a female spiritual presence around her. And I refer to her as juror number 9 because we have their names and what position they're in. And she was in, the seat number 9, and a female energy was coming through, and I started feeling a tightening around my throat. So I knew that this person who was communicating had some trouble breathing prior to passing. Well, the case involved a battery. In other words, I live in a part of Florida where there's a lot of rednecks. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but basically, it was a fight in a bar where Redneck A got in a fight with Redneck B. So it was mutual combat, but it was still a crime of violence, and I had an obligation to make sure that my client received a fair trial. So I asked this woman, "Do you have an issue with crimes of violence? Have you or has anyone in your family ever been the victim of a violent crime?" And she began to tremble, and the tears flowed from her eyes, and she looked up at me and she said, "A year ago my sister was in a foreign country when an escaped mental patient strangled her, dismembered her body, and threw her in a garbage can like she was trash." So I'm standing there in court and everyone's looking at me. You could hear a pin drop. My client's looking up at me like, "Dude, what are you doing?" And I'm thinking, in law school, they didn't teach me how to deal with this one. But there I was, Brent, literally with a foot in two worlds. One, as my obligation as an attorney to defend this guy zealously and to the extent of the law, and yet a spirit of this woman's sister was coming through to bring a very important message. And if the listeners want to find out what happens, they're going to have to read my book, Never Letting Go.
Excellent. I like the cliffhanger.
I
Does
try to go
pardon
ahead.
me. Who would benefit most from reading this book? That would if How would you answer that?
Anyone who's lost a loved one. My book
Okay.
is interfaith. It's for all people of all faiths. It's also for people who like a good page turner. I try to write in an engaging style that makes people want to read it. One of the most flattering things I've heard about the book is I read it in one day. I could not put it down. The most humbling and overwhelming thing I've heard, and I've heard this over 1,000 times now, and I mean that between the emails and the letters and people that I see at events. I was going to commit suicide until I read Never Letting Go.
Wow. That's such an incredible thing to hear. That's got to make you feel so good about what you're contributing, what your service is to the world.
It is very humbling, and Brent, publishing a book is not easy. You get a lot of rejections,
Right.
and it's just a lot of people, no, no, we're not doing this book, no, no, and it's really aggravating. And then when you get a publisher, they want you to rewrite this and rewrite that and dumb it down and water it down, and they want this and they want that, and it's very, very frustrating and difficult. But I remember the first letter that I received. It came to me through my publisher. It was a woman from Australia, and she lived in the outback of Australia. And she said that her mother had died, and it's a long story. I'll just make it short. And she felt guilty over the circumstances, even though it wasn't her fault. And she was going to commit suicide, and she was actually contemplating how to do it. And when she read Never Letting Go, it relieved her agony somewhat, to the point where she knew that suicide was not the answer to her problem in coping with the death of a loved one. And I remember reading that letter, and it came to me, Brent, that if I'd only sold that one book, then it was all worth it.
Right. Absolutely. And what was in talking about this book, what was the process of it coming about? Was there a spark that kind of got the whole thing going?
Actually, there was. Uh, After my mother died, and I write a lot about my mom in the book because, being a psychic medium, she taught me a lot about life and about spirituality and the other side. And I was devastated after she passed. People say, well, you're a medium, so this shouldn't really hurt you. Well, it does, because we're people. And on top of it, when you're a medium, you're also very, very sensitive. And let's face it,
Right.
it's mom. Okay. And according to grief therapists and psychologists, the most painful loss after losing a child is losing a mother. And I was devastated, so I started going to a grief support group at a local Catholic church. Well, I noticed I was recovering pretty quickly. And what happened is, I'd go every 2 weeks and to the grief share, and people are sitting in a circle and they're talking about their loved ones. Well, I started seeing their loved ones and getting messages from them. And so I would say to another group member, well, maybe if your son were here, he would want you to know this. Maybe if your mom were here, she would like you to know. And people are looking at me, and I remember one lady goes, well, that's exactly something my mother would say. Well, the facilitator of the group, she was this really nice lady, she was from Ireland, and on a break she goes, Mark, I know what you're doing, and you can't be doing this here. I said, what? Talking to spirits? I go, but we're in a Catholic church, isn't that what we do? Yeah, but not like this. So I said, okay, that's fine. And I decided not to go anymore. And so then about a month later, I'm at a grocery store, and I'll never forget. I was in the dairy section. I'm picking out some Greek yogurt, because the Greek yogurt phase. Got to eat Greek yogurt. So I pick it out, and this little tiny lady walks up to me, and I recognized her from the group. And I said, "Hey, darling, how you doing?" And she came up and she took me by the hand, and she looked up at me and she said, "Mark, would you come back to the group? You made us feel better." And that's
That's
it, just
wonderful.
like hit me right then and there. It's like, I need to write a book about how reaching out to the other side can help you heal from grief.
Right. Wow, that's wonderful. And you talked a lot about in you telling this story, a psychic and a medium. Is there a line that you draw between those two? I know you identify with both. Is there a distinction that you make?
Yeah, yes, there are. The terms psychic and medium are often used interchangeably. Traditionally, psychic abilities are fortune telling, and I don't mean that in the demeaning sense. It's being able to discern the energy of a person, place, or thing. So you can pick up past, present, future events. You can get vibrational information from inanimate objects like murder scenes and things like that. Whereas being a medium is where you tune into the energy of a third person, meaning a spirit. So it comes down to this. If you want to know about your love life, career, and future, see a psychic. If you want to talk to deceased loved ones, see a medium.
Okay, good to know. And you talked a lot about seeing spirits. How exactly do you see these spirits? Is it that kind of classic, what everyone thinks of, sixth sense, where they're just kind of standing around?
I love The Sixth Sense because it's a fun movie and it's a great movie. And I remember the first time I saw it, I immediately called my mom. I said, "Mom, we're going to the movies," and I went and saw it with her, and she was crying through the whole thing. And the thing is, the way I see them, they're not walking around with machetes in their head, like they are in The Sixth Sense, because that's Hollywood, and they like to dramatize things and make it very intense. But the way I see them, sometimes I see them external to my body. In other words, like an image, a person standing in the room. But I want to ask you, and I want to ask all the listeners to think of the Statue of Liberty. Okay, Brent, do you see it in your mind's eye?
Hmm.
That is how I see them, as if they are a vivid memory
Mm,
in my mind. And
okay.
without getting too technical, when people talk about clairvoyance and clairvoyance, that is a term which means seeing. In other words, vision, clear vision, clear seeing. And there's two types. There's subjective clairvoyance, which is how you see a spirit in your mind's eye. And there's objective clairvoyance, which is where you see a spirit external to your body. In other words, like standing in a room, standing somewhere. And the reason it's called objective is because more than one person usually will be able to perceive or see that.
Right. I was wondering, when people talk about spirits and they talk about the other side, which you discuss a lot in your book, they talk about experiences with evil. Is there such thing as evil spirits? Have you had experience that? Would you tell people that there is evil out there?
Yeah, I may be breaking ranks with a lot of psychics and certainly with the ghost hunters, but I don't believe in evil spirits and I don't encounter them. Everything that I do is very positive and uplifting, and I look at I don't believe in the devil, I don't believe in hell. However, jerks die every minute, and there may be spirits who are not as high in the light as other spirits, and in other words, the other side has a whole level of frequencies, and some spirits may go into a higher frequency than others. But as far as an eternal hell and a central command of evil with this James Bond type villain ruling over the land of the darkness, that's a bunch of primitive medieval superstitious nonsense. So there may be energies who come through that are on a lower frequency because the other side has a multitude of frequencies, and spirits that are on a higher frequency. So in that respect, maybe there are spirits who are negative, but as far as being evil, I don't believe that.
Right. And do you make a distinction between what is called spirit and what a ghost is?
Yes. A spirit is an immortal living entity. We all have a spirit. We are spirits having a material world existence. And when we die, our spirit separates from its connection to the body and transmits, and basically goes to the other side. A ghost, there's a couple different schools of thought on what a ghost is. One is that it's a spirit trapped here in our world, and I don't buy that one. Two, it's a spirit that is here in our world and is aware that he or she is dead, but hasn't let go of this world. In other words, they pop back and forth. That one I tend to give some credence to. The third one is that, let's say you walk into a haunted house, you get the chills, and you maybe see an apparition. Matter retains energy and vibration. So let's say that there was a murder committed in a house and people go in there and they hear sounds and they feel things. What it is a residual energy echo. Okay, it's like it's an echo that keeps going on and on and on. It's not actually a spirit, but it can seem like one and feel like one. In other words, seeing an apparition in that context is no more a living intelligent spirit than your reflection in a mirror is a human being. It's simply a reflection.
Right.
And so what with the paranormal, the ghost hunters and the house clears do is they're able to interrupt that energetic flow or resonance and get the haunting or whatever it is to leave.
Gotcha. And I'd like to ask you a question that I think a lot of people experience this. It's a real basic, maybe example of how you experience your psychic abilities day to day. A lot of people will think of somebody who maybe they haven't seen in a while, and either that day or the next day, they'll get a phone call or a text from that person. How would you explain that to somebody? Because I know everyone, I'm sure, has experienced this over time.
I believe everybody does experience that. And what happens, Brent, is that that's a psychic ability. Remember when I was talking earlier that a psychic ability is tuning in to the energy of a person, place, or thing. So think about all around us, there's this energy. It's like a radio station, and your brainwave frequency can increase and tap into that. Well, the other side is timeless. And according to the great physicists um, like Albert Einstein and Richard Feynman and Stephen Hawking, and I'm pretty sure, based on what I've read about Edgar Cayce, he discussed this as well, is that everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen is going on, occurring simultaneously, at least in the energetic sense. Now it's hard for us to understand that because in a corporeal form everything we know is finite, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We're born, we grow old, and we die. Therefore we tend to think, and we believe, justifiably so, that time is linear and moves in one direction. However, our spirit is not limited to that. So, in our brainwave frequency, in other words, our spirit interfaces with that, we pick up on, oh, somebody's going to be coming back into our life, or we're going to see that we haven't seen from a long time. So we pick up on that and we get that impression. We have a dream or we get a feeling, or gee, I started thinking about Sheila and I haven't seen Sheila in 6 months. And then tomorrow you run into Sheila at the coffee shop. And so that's what the theory is that you're picking up on this in the vibrational sense, because what we perceive to be a future event is coinciding with what we perceive to be the present and the past in the energetic sense. And I know it's difficult to grasp that, and when you try to think about it, it's a bit mind-boggling. But that is the theory as to how people can see the future and why those deja vu experiences happen to us.
Right. And for somebody who is looking to maybe get more in tune with that, and is there any daily practice that you could suggest?
I always recommend prayer and meditation. Prayer
Right.
is when you talk to God, meditation is when you listen. But meditation serves a lot of purposes because it can calm and quiet the mind. And quieting the mind and just getting the tension and the distractions and all that aggravation out of your consciousness, it's very helpful. In fact, a lot of big corporations now are requiring their, not only their CEOs but also the corporate offices, the VPs and managers to take meditation courses for stress reduction. So, hey, I guess we've all been onto something, and now corporate America gets it too.
Right, absolutely. That's a good sign. You also touched a little bit about something that I find very fascinating, and I've done a bit of research on it, and it's kind of been a thing that's popped up throughout history for decades, actually. This idea of remote viewing, and it goes hand in hand with what we've been talking about, kind of this interconnectedness of everything. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Remote viewing is a
Yeah.
fascinating subject of study. Um, did you know, Brent, that there was a patron saint of television?
Really? I did not know that.
There is. Her name is Saint Clare of Assisi, and she was a follower and a contemporary of Saint Francis of Assisi. Now, they lived 800 years ago.
Right.
What happened was St. Clare being a very pious nun, and she was known for her good works. And I mean, come on, she hung out with St. Francis. Okay, so these were very good people. He was sort of the Gandhi of his day, and she became very ill and was unable to attend church services to go to mass. So she prayed for God to allow her to see what was happening in mass, and she began to receive visions that she saw in real time. 800 years later, television is invented. In 1958, Pope Pius XII declares St. Clare the patron saint of television. Reason being is Clare was a remote viewer, and remote viewing is where you can take your consciousness and voluntarily direct it anywhere in the world to observe something in real time. And the Vatican has been very well aware of psychic and mediumistic abilities. They've been studying them for centuries. A lot of the saints, St. Francis of Assisi and St. Clare of Assisi being just two of them, who exhibited what we would now call psychic and mediumistic behaviors. And even though a lot of people say this is ridiculous and they discredit it, the CIA, the KGB, the British MI5, the French Secret Service, the Chinese, North Korean, Japanese, and Australian, just to name a few, have been using remote viewers for at least 60 years. So if it was such nonsense, how come tens of millions of dollars have been spent on it by all these secret service organizations? So remote viewing is a skill. I was in a class one time where we did some, and it was kind of neat. I've also met a few people in military special forces. One in particular that did this, and wow, talk about an intense guy. Nice guy, but really intense. But remote viewing is a very real thing, and I think it's cool that the Catholic Church took their most famous remote viewer, or one of their most famous remote viewers, and declared her the saint of television.
Right. Who would have ever known there would be a saint of television? That's funny.
I know.
But I suppose they have one for everything.
I'm sure we're
What
going to
it
get a saint for the internet at some point.
Yeah, I'm sure it's only a matter of time. Why do you think there I mean, it seems to be a trend right now where this material that was so hush hush, this remote viewing, which was obviously a secret government thing that's been going on, many authors like yourself openly talk about it. Is that a change that you see taking place more rapidly lately, where we can talk about these things more openly? And also, what's the feedback that you've been getting from that?
I do believe that this is becoming more open. You have to realize that we're living in an era now where we take miraculous technology for granted. I mean,
Right.
right now, um, our sound engineer on this program is in England. You're in another part of the US. I'm in Florida, and this is all happening over the internet and getting bounced off of satellites, yet it's happening at light speed, so it's in real time. All
Right.
right, 100 years ago, this would be science fantasy, not even science fiction, science fantasy.
Right.
200 years ago, it would be considered preposterous. 300 years ago, witchcraft, and we'd all get burned at the stake. Um, so so now we live in an era where technological advances and also strange phenomenon with human beings can be observed objectively without without the lynch mob coming. So, and the feedback that I'm getting is, for the most part, very positive. And you're always going to have the pseudo skeptics. A real skeptic is somebody that says, I don't know, I would like to see the evidence and then make up my own mind, as opposed to, I don't believe this, I never will, I'm closed minded. And then the religious people that, well, it's not in the King James version of the Bible, so it must be evil. And when you start acting like that, what you're doing is you're cutting off your logic. You're also putting a cork on advancing your own spirituality. Because for me, spirituality isn't just believe what they tell you because it's in some book. That may give you some insights, but it's also about the personal experience, the direct connect with God. And Brent, you don't have to be a psychic medium to have a direct personal relationship with God. Everybody does. Everybody can. And I write this in Never Letting Go that God exists in spite of religion, not because of religion. And I always like to quote the late great Beatle George Harrison, who was a very spiritual man. And he said that all religions are branches of one big tree. It doesn't matter what you call God, just so long as you call.
That's great. I love that. And I understand that you're working on a book that should be out next year, I think. Am I correct?
Yes, my new book, Evidence of Eternity. In fact, I just saw it. My publisher is Llewellyn Worldwide, and I was looking at Never Letting Go, and I noticed, oh, they're already advertising Evidence of Eternity. And Evidence of Eternity is Never Letting Go. My book, Never Letting Go, is a guide on the journey through grief. And it teaches you how to recognize when loved ones in spirit are near. It's very inspirational and healing. Evidence of Eternity explains how spirit communication works. And it dispels the fear and superstition surrounding spirit communication. It weaves together science, quantum physics, theories, theology, human physiology, and my own research through evidential mediumship to explain about the nature of the other side, what happens when we die, and different aspects, the technical aspects of spirit communication. How does it work? What do messages mean? And what I'm very pleased about, and the feedback I've gotten, it's already been endorsed by Raymond Moody, Kenneth Ring, and Jeffrey Long, the top 3 near-death researchers in America. Dr. Joe Vitale of The Secret, Dr. Mai Haley, who helped her husband Alex Haley write Roots, William Bowman of the Monroe Institute on out-of-body experiences, because they all agree that my work coincides with the observations of near death experience research. It's just that Evidence of Eternity goes further. And they said, and it's fun to read because, yeah, I mean, nobody wants to read something, it's like an
Yeah,
algebra textbook.
that's essential.
Yeah, you got people, and this is edgy. This book is edgy, and it's very groundbreaking because a lot of the terminology and perceptions of mediumship were coined in the golden age of spiritualism, which is the Victorian era up through the 1930s, and that's fine. But I'm bringing mediumship, an understanding of it, into the 21st century, and I've
Right.
developed new and innovative concepts that nobody else has. And like I said, the people that understand spirit communication, afterlife research, are looking at this going, wow, we've never seen anything like this. And so I'm very, very pleased, and very looking forward to the release of Evidence of Eternity.
It seems like you connect a lot of dots in this book, which for me, that is would be the most appealing thing in a book for me. I love when people connect a lot of dots. And I think that's also maybe one of the biggest barriers that people find is that nobody's connected the dots for them. Nobody's turned on those light bulbs, hasn't given them those resources that they need. Um, I think it's great that you're bringing that all. How did you connect all those dots, and how's your experience been with connecting dots for other people?
Well, being an attorney, everything's about evidence, and being an evidential medium, once again, the key word there is evidence. And I know a lot of the high profile famous mediums, and I see them interview and they say, "Well, how does this work?" I don't know. And so I started doing my own research, and I do know there are theories about this which appear to be valid. And see, nothing is about this is hocus pocus or magic. It's all based on vibrational frequency and transfer of energy. And the thing is, Brent, energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred. Second law of thermodynamics and physics is proves that. So when a person dies, the energy that is within his or her body goes to another frequency. For the sake of clarity and brevity, we call it the other side. You can call it whatever you want, but the other side. And the other side is not some far off, distant, nebulous thing orbiting Alpha Centauri. It is a parallel dimension. Now, according to theoretical physicists, there is not just a universe, but there's multiverses. There's other universes which coincide and overlap. So I started reading about this and looking into it. And then I started reading about Hinduism. And the Hindus talk about multiple universes. And if our universe and world end, their attitude is, well, so what? It'll just reform. And I'm like, wow, the Hindus have been talking about this for quite some time. The theoretical physicists are talking about this, and all the major religions kind of their great teachers talk about this. Then in my work with spirits, and you ask them questions, and occasionally they will give you some of these zinger answers like, wow. So that's how it all is. So I started tracking all this, put it together, and I decided to write Evidence of Eternity, because it was high time. Instead of us all getting this airy fairy granola chewing, tie-dyed superstition, and with all due respect to all the people who like granola and tie-dye and are superstitious, I wanted something that was the gap between the metaphysical and the mainstream. And being a psychic lawyer, I'm that gap between the metaphysical and the mainstream, because yes, what I do as a medium may to many people seem bizarre and esoteric, and they may not believe it. But then I'm also a lawyer, and a credibility and seriousness, and I'm probably one of the biggest skeptics of all. Before I will accept something, I need to have the personal experience and understand it and have a plausible working theory as to how this can be true. So basically, that in a nutshell was the genesis for Evidence of Eternity.
Wonderful. Look forward to reading that. And how has it been? Your response from the media. I know you're very much a face who's out there in the media, and you stick to your guns, and you know what you're talking about, and you've done your research. Like you said, you are very evidence based. What has it been like dealing with the media, being on the circuit as you are?
Interestingly enough, I was on the Fox News morning show in Minneapolis recently, and there were three anchors. It was two men and a woman, and boy, they were on me. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. Da da da. And the thing is, they hadn't asked me anything I hadn't heard before. And one of the anchors, she was like kind of she was trying to be very skeptical, and she said, well, what do you say to people who don't believe this? I mean, I have a hard time believing this. I don't believe this. And I said something that that maybe I shouldn't have, but I'm glad that I did. I said, I don't compare myself to him for 1 second, but there were people standing in the same room with Jesus who didn't believe him. So how can I expect more? And let me tell you, Brent, all of a sudden all three of the anchors just stop and they go, Okay, so tonight you're going to be speaking where? you know, and when the program was over, the anchors were talking. They go, "Wow, we never heard anyone explain it like that, and we really appreciated that." And I said, and I said, "Look, I don't mean to offend anyone's belief system, okay?" I said, "But just because you don't believe it or a group of people don't believe it, and recently on CBS morning show in Houston, Great Day Houston, I talk about spirit communication, and told them." I said, just because a test hasn't been invented, or because we can't put something in a petri dish or subject it to some type of analysis, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean,
Right.
science is full of we don't know what we don't know. And what is the scientific norm of today may be considered ridiculous 15 years from now.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's happened countless times in science. Just even the most fundamental things that we take for granted were we thought there was something. I mean, just the world is flat, for example. I mean, science is constantly building upon itself and kind of erasing the mistakes.
Well, there was a thought that when trains were invented, and there was a big fear that, well, the train's going to go so fast it will suck all the oxygen out of the passenger compartment, form a vacuum, and kill everyone on board. I'm serious. And there were people that
Yeah.
were terrified. And then they're like, they did this test. And of course, we know that, that that's not the case. But at the time, going 30 or 40 miles an hour was, nobody went that fast. And certainly not in this big contraption. And so that was actually a scientific concern briefly, thank goodness, but one which certainly has no credibility.
It's too funny. And I want to talk a little bit about something a little more applicable and a little more practical. Of We talked a little bit about meditation and prayer earlier, and as those are essentials for keeping you connected, keeping myself connected as well. What are some other practices or things that Casey talks a lot about ideals? To have an ideal, it seems your ideal seems to be service, the ideal of service, which is something that is kind of your driving force. What else would you suggest to people to find more fulfillment in their life, find a deeper connection?
You have to believe in God. And I don't presume to tell people how to believe in God. And you can call God, Yahweh, Vishnu, Krishna, Jehovah, Allah, Great Spirit, Amarasu. You can give God a host of names. But what you have to realize is that fame and fortune and money, and sex and material acquisitions, they're fine and all, but that isn't what really makes a person fulfilled and satisfied. And when you have that connection to God, have a belief system in a higher power, the light, the source, whatever you want to call God, I think that's important. Because I always find it funny when I'm interviewed and people say, "Well, do you believe in God?" Well, how could I not? I communicate with people who have died. I communicate with discarnate intelligence, and they all indicate that God exists. But God, from what I've been told, is not a white man sitting on a throne wearing a crown smiting people for not donating 10% to to the whatever church. And it's funny because I saw something like that on Big Bang recently where Sheldon's girlfriend said, "I have no objection believing in a deity, yet I take exception with one who requires attendance." and, and I started laughing when I saw that. But I really think that you have to have a faith center. And let's face it, some of the most unhappy people I've known have no faith in anything, no belief system. And when you believe in God and you believe that there are repercussions to everything you do, in Christianity, it's in Galatians, for God shall not be mocked. Whatever a man shall sow, he shall reap. The Hindus call that the law of karma, as do the Buddhists. In physics, it's for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I like to joke with people, and I tell them that, and I go, "So be nice." So, the next time you think of saying something nasty, don't. And when you start treating people the way you want to be treated, I really think that's the start. And it isn't always easy because not everybody else is functioning like that. I went
Right.
to Catholic school. I was raised and groomed to be a Catholic priest, but for various reasons, a lot of reasons, I chose not to do that. And I was always taught to be humble and humility. And then I went to law school, and there were people who apparently missed all the memos that I had gotten. I am so super good at this. I am so super smart at that. Oh, my parents are so rich. We're so much better than everybody else. And I remember actually hearing these things and I was mortified, because I was raised in an environment you don't say things like that's a sin, which was dysfunctional in a whole nother way. But but when you go around and it's all about ego, 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 me, I, and I've heard ego stands for edging God out. So
Mm.
when you believe that you are the center of the universe and that everything revolves around you and it's all me all the time, then you're getting away from that. And a belief in God, yes, you are the center of the universe in that you perceive, that you are the focal point of your perception, but you are not the be all and the end all. And the ego is always there to tell you more is better, bigger is better, you have to do this, you have to do that. And the nasty thing about the ego, because earlier you were talking about evil spirits, there's no devil, but there is an ego. The ego always tempts you with the promise of something you already possess.
Mm.
That's why we always think we're not good enough. We need more and better and this and that. Well,
Right.
you don't.
I like that. That last part about the ego is great. I hadn't heard that before. Thank you. And I wanted to kind of end here on you're a feature presenter at the upcoming Virginia Beach conference here at the A.R.E. And this
Yes.
conference in particular is entitled Life Everlasting, God's Open Door, and the Continuity of the Soul. Pretty much everything that we've been talking about today. This is from November 7th through the 9th of this year for those who are interested. And can you tell us a little bit about what conference attendees can expect from your particular presentation?
I will be explaining interdimensional communication, which is what I call mediumship, how we're able to communicate with the other side and the scientific theories behind that. I work a lot of humor into my presentations because I find that humor and enlightening the energetic atmosphere in the room makes it easier for spirits to communicate. And then the second part of my presentation, I will be conducting gallery readings, which means mini readings on people within the audience. And I'm really looking forward to this conference. Number one, I love the Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment, and number two, Virginia Beach is not exactly a bad place to be.
It is a very special place. Very good energy.
Most definitely.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections. It was truly an honor to have you on. I thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom and definitely connecting some dots for myself and hopefully for the listeners as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Brent. And to all the listeners, I look forward to seeing you at Edgar Cayce, and may God bless you.
Absolutely. Have a great day, Mark. Thank you. You can learn more about Mark and purchase his books by visiting his website at neverlettinggo.com. Don't miss your chance to see Mark in person as he is a featured presenter at the upcoming Virginia Beach conference entitled Life Everlasting, God's Open Door, and the Continuity of the Soul. This is from November 7th through the 9th of this year. And of course, you can register for this and other conferences offered here at the A.R.E. in Virginia Beach by visiting our website at edgarcayce.org/conferences. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment and moretalk.tv, I'm your host, Brenton Bickerstaff, reminding you that spiritual understanding does not happen overnight. As Cayce said, big changes happen line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. Encourage others on their path, and you'll find you'll go far on yours. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you all next week. And now it's time for the thought for the day here on Reflections. And joining us, as always, is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Oh, thank you again for having me, Brent. Always a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And if you can go ahead and read the thought for the day for our listeners.
I'd be happy to. This is from reading 3292-1. You only fail if you quit trying. The trying is oft counted for righteousness. Remember, as he has given, I do not condemn thee. Go be patient, be kind, and the Lord be with you. You know, to me, that's so reassuring. You get out there and you're trying your best to apply these principles that you've been learning over time. And sometimes, it just all turns to muck. And you think, boy, I'm really approaching this the wrong way. Well, we have the opportunity to step back inside, take a deep breath, be still, and as the reading says, be patient, be kind, not just to others, but to ourselves, and the Lord be with you. Or you could say, sometimes I say, the Lord is always with me. So as I feel like I'm not applying it correctly, as I'm stumbling, that I'm not being condemned, I'm being guided back on track if I keep on trying, if I be patient, if I be kind to myself and others, that the Lord will be with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really love this one. I love the the one note and it says the trying is oft counted, for righteousness. I love that because a lot of us just don't realize that we don't have to be perfect. We just have to strive every day. We have to have that ideal that is our driving force. And I think in the end of this reading, he says, be patient and be kind. Those two ideals in themselves they can carry you through a lifetime, and they, can arguably take a lifetime to really put into practice. It's, those are something that I think everybody is working with. But I think a problem that everybody really deals with is, just not self-condemnation. Condemning yourself is one of the biggest things that I see, within my own inner journey, but you also see it reflected within your world. um, if we're not really taught to not beat ourselves up. It's something that we really indulge in without realizing it sometimes. And
Mhm.
I think, if that's something that we could really work on, just not condemning ourselves and realizing that, like he says, the trying is often counted for righteousness. Meaning, if your heart is in the right place and you are coming from an ideal, coming from a good place, you really are doing a lot to create good, not only in yourself, but bring good into the world too.
Yes, I thoroughly agree with that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the thought for the day, Bill. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Brent. Have a wonderful day today.
Thank you. You too.